Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 69. The first book today is Alexander, The Ambiguity of Greatness by Guy McLean Rogers, 2004. This is a biography of Alexander the Great, one of the most important people in history. He was born in 356 BC, died in 323 BC, so he only lived for 33 years. He was a Macedonian Greek. Macedonia is, Greek area, but not a remote part of Greece. He was the Macedonian Greek who conquered the mighty Persian Empire and built an empire from Greece to India, including areas which became Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Pakistan. Alexander the Great brought the greatness of Greece, ancient Greece, to the Near East. Persian rule was replaced by Greek rule. Greek language became popular from Asia Minor, which is now Turkey, to India. They say he's considered that he started Greco-Roman civilization. Christianity spread through Greek language. God bless Alexander the Great, a world hero. Now, some people say, "Oh, Alexander the Great, he was just this conqueror. He was just killed a lot of people." But he was a military conqueror. But you have to look beyond that. And I believe that what he did, he brought. The ancient Greeks were a very talented people, very educated. In fact, they were really, probably you could say, the engine behind the spread of Christianity, because they were a very moral people. They had a lot of wisdom, so they recognized the greatness of Christianity and became Christians in large numbers. They were very talented. They developed democracy, and they're very educated people. So and an extremely advanced people. So this conquest of it by Alexander brought this high civilization to areas which were less advanced, and that was a good thing. And also because of and these areas became Greek speaking. And some people believe that Alexander the Great reincarnated as Napoleon, and then later as Charles Lindbergh, and all three men played roles in the development of one world. And so Alexander, one of the things that he did that I thought was great, he conquered areas. It's one thing to conquer a people militarily, but then the question is, how can you win them over? And very often that attempt isn't even made. It's like, okay, we control you now, but then if the people are resentful or full of hatred, then it's problematic. So he wanted to win them over, and very often he would adopt the dress, the clothing of local people, especially the Persians, to please them. They'd already been defeated militarily, and this created resentment among his own forces. His Greek warriors thought, "Oh, what's Alexander doing? Wearing Persian clothing?" But he was smart, because he did this to win them over. And so he did an awful lot of good, and the Greek influence was positive. He conquered these because he brought this high civilization to areas which were really backward. The Persians didn't have any idea of democracy or great learning. The Greeks were a very learned people. So I think this is a wonderful, an amazing story. In fact, Alexander the Great for centuries was a hero in the Mediterranean Sea. Little boys, they would have like Alexander the Great dolls, and he was very highly admired, and he was a great warrior, but also a great thinker. And he was Greek, and this empire eventually became part of the Roman Empire. And of course, the Roman Empire was this great ancient empire, and the Greek contribution was key because they were so talented in terms of education and the arts and politics. Wonderful book, and a very important person to study, Alexander the Great. The next people is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom, 2003. It's a good book. It's pretty easy to read. It's fairly short. The character it's a novel. The story The character is a guy named Eddie. He maintains rides at a seaside amusement park. And in the story, he dies. But, life continues after he dies. And after his death, he makes sense of his life. And he forgives his father. And he learns that he was successful in life. Very often people, we get depressed and so forth. And he'd been a prisoner of war in the Philippines as well. That caught my attention. So, this Mitch Albom, he writes these very uplifting, positive books, and really enjoyed this, and shows that sometimes the main thing, he was a good guy. This character, sometimes he didn't make a lot of money, didn't have a great job, so he thought, oh, I'm not an important person, but he was important. He was a good guy. He was a good man. So this is a very endearing novel by Mitch Albom. The next book is James Madison by Gary Wills, 2002. This is a short biography, only 164 pages. And Gary Wills is one of the well-known historians and biographers of American presidents. And so the topic is the fourth U.S. president, James Madison, the father of the U.S. Constitution, the man who prosecuted the War of 1812. One of the very important people in American history, because the Constitution is when the 13 British colonies, which had become 13 independent states, not really connected well, pretty much independent countries, and it was the Constitution which made them one country and created a strong central national government. And James Madison was the clock spring. He's the guy who made it happen. So really an inspiring person, and I really enjoyed this book. The next book is Things I Have Learned Watching the Browns by Terry Pluto and Hundreds of Browns Fans, 2010. This is about the Cleveland Browns in the National Football League and their fans. Terry Pluto is a very well-known Cleveland sports writer and author of American sports books. So this is about, he talked with a lot of Cleveland Browns fans about their memories, fathers and sons, and some of the famous players, Otto Graham, the tremendous quarterback, Jim Brown, the running back, Brian Sipe, Bernie Kosar, and Tim Couch, three of the top quarterbacks over the years. And this was part of my growing up. My father and I watching Browns games. Actually, with my father and I raking leaves out in the yard with a Browns game on the radio, on a transistor radio, and we'd move the radio from place to place, and so we'd be out there working, raking leaves, and listening to the Browns game. So I have very fond memories of that with my very dear father, and getting something done. The leaves, we had a big yard, leaves needed to be raked. So this is a interesting book for Cleveland Browns sports fans, or anyone a fan of the NFL. Fine book. Terry Pluto is a fine writer. The next book is James Madison, A Life Reconsidered by Lynn Cheney, 2014. This book has 458 pages. The author is the wife of former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was Vice President for George W. Bush between 2001 and 2009. James Madison was an amazing guy. The fourth U.S. president. He was quiet and studious, and he decided at a young age that government was important. So he read as much as he could about European and ancient governments. And all of that learning was the basis for him becoming the father of the U.S. Constitution. Very inspiring, because I myself love reading books. It's my main interest in life. And people have said, oh, Peter, what is he doing? He's just reading books. And some people in my family say, all Peter does is read books all day. But this shows, that reading books is important. And James Madison, all the books that he read, and he wasn't making any money doing it, but it became the basis of the U.S. Constitution, because he was the real leader in the Constitutional Convention, and most of the ideas, the bulk of the U.S. Constitution, came from his learning, his efforts at trying to figure out, what kind of a government can we create here in the U.S. Now that we have defeated the British and achieved our independence. So this is really inspiring. It shows that, reading books is important and powerful. The power of knowledge. and the power of history, because this is what he did, James Madison did, to get the ideas that helped create the U.S. Constitution, which was the basis of the national government for the United States. Really inspiring, incredible story, true story. The next book is The Tipping Point, How Little Things Can Make a Big Difference, by Malcolm Gladwell, 2000. This is an interesting book. The author studies how trends happen. Something becomes popular, and you wonder, and then you wonder why. How did it happen? He talks about Sesame Street, the HIV disease in Baltimore, New York City crime reduction. And one of the things they did in New York City, they had a big crime problem back in the 1970s. And one of the things they did is they removed graffiti from subway cars and arrested fare cheaters because they believed that people became demoralized. They saw this graffiti, and it was kind of tended to. It was believed that it led people to feel that crime, they could commit crimes, and the fare people who didn't pay to. They were jumping over the turnstiles, getting on the subway. So crime was reduced. He talks about Paul Revere's Ride, and his point is that charismatic people can make trends happen. One person with charisma and with an idea and with some strong-willed and determination, and something can happen. So this is an inspiring book. So if you have a good idea, go out, put it out there, see what you can do, and don't give up, and keep going, because this is what the world needs for improvement. People to make contributions, because God knows this world needs improvement. It's a wonderful book, very inspiring. The Tipping Point. The next book is Glory Days in Tribe Town, the Cleveland Indians and Jacobs Field, 1994 to 1997, Terry Pluto and Tom Hamilton, 2014. So this is the story of the Cleveland Indians Major League Baseball team. During that period, 4 years, from 1994 to 97, they got to 2 World Series. They were a strong contender, and they didn't win the World Series, but there was a lot of excitement in Cleveland. The fans were all very happy that we had such a strong team, especially in 1995. It was a tremendous year, incredible year. They had all this hitting, and 97 came very close. And John Hart was the general manager. Of course, it's easy to second-guess him. And he traded Carlos Baerga, my favorite player, in 1996. I was disappointed. He cut Eddie Murray's salary after 1995, and he let go Paul Sorrento. So I thought he did too much tinkering. But anyway, hindsight is 20/20, and of course it's easy to be critical. He was, making decisions, trying to make things better. So anyway, a lot of good times through these amazing players. Jim Thome, the big hitter, Albert Bell, the big slugger, Kenny Lofton, who could run, Manny Ramirez, who's he became a Hall of Famer, Orel Hershiser, tremendous pitcher. Charlie Nagy was a strong pitcher. Sandy Alomar, who was really our leader, catcher, and he's still with us. He's still a coach. Jose Mesa, the closer. So Terry Pluto, the co-authors, Terry Pluto, the tremendous sports writer and author, and Tom Hamilton, the radio voice up till now of the Cleveland Indians. Fine book. The next book is They Must Be Stopped, Why We Must Defeat Radical Islam and How We Can Do It, by Bridget Gabriel, 2008. Well, this is another book by Bridget Gabriel, this Lebanese American woman. She makes a the case, a very controversial case, that Islam, the religion of Islam, is problematic. Because, and you can't get around the fact that Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was a man of war. So this is the Islamic Jihad we're dealing with. Sometimes these terrorists, they believe they're following the example of Muhammad. And from the beginning, actually, Muhammad and then his followers wanted to conquer the whole world, and for the whole world to become Muslim. And boy, they went a long way in that direction, because all of Arabia became Muslim, all of North Africa. Spain and Portugal for centuries were Muslim, and they were stopped in France. And then going east, what's now Turkey, the Middle East, into Central Asia, into India, Indonesia, even in the Philippines. When the Spanish arrived in the Philippines, the Philippines was on the way to becoming Muslim. And it was really stopped by the Spanish invasion. And so anyway, Islam, spread and really was on the road to conquering the world, and eventually it was stopped in Central Asia and stopped by China and so forth, although Western China is Muslim. So this Bridget Gabriel, she's a very brave woman. Boy, talk about a courage, And so and I think she's really infuriates these radical Muslims because she's a woman, and they believe that women really are second-class citizens. They don't believe in equality for women, and here she's so opinionated and strong, such a strong spirit, and speaks her mind about what she believes. And so hopefully Islam, I don't think there's any need for Islam to be violent anymore. It was a religion of war at one time, spread through war. But in today's world, if you want people to join your religion, I believe, you have to appeal to them. So if Muslims want to spread Islam, it has to be through, I believe, maybe I'm naive, through people wanting to become Muslim. And if that's the case, if people choose it, that's fine. But there's absolutely no need in today's world, I believe, for a military component for Islam. But that's just my opinion. The next book is The Machine. A hot team, a legendary season, and a heart-stopping World Series. The story of the 1975 Cincinnati Reds by Joe Posnanski, 2009. Well, I really enjoyed this book. The Cincinnati Reds won the World Series in Major League Baseball in 1975, and actually the following year. And they had these, famous players: Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, Tony Perez, Davey Concepcion, Ken Griffey Sr., George Foster, Cesar Geronimo, Sparky Anderson, the manager, Jack Billingham, Pedro Borbon, and others. What a team. What an interesting. They could hit. Primarily a tremendous hitting team. And pitching wasn't that great, but, they was good enough to win. All these famous players. Pete Rose, the guy who was the hit machine, who could had 4,000 hits. Johnny Bench, the tremendous catcher. He had some power. Tony Perez, who had power. Concepcion, tremendous shortstop. And so I really enjoyed this team. I was 15 years old in 1975. They defeated the Boston Red Sox in the World Series in very exciting 7 games. They went the distance. So and they called the Reds the Big Red Machine because they were such a powerful team. The next book is John Quincy Adams, American Visionary by Fred Kaplan, 2014. This is a tremendous book, 570 pages. What an interesting life John Quincy Adams led. He had many years in Europe, actually, as growing up and then as an adult. He was the son of a U.S. president. His father was U.S. president. 6 years in Russia as U.S. ambassador there. He had 2 brothers who were alcoholic, 2 sons who were alcoholic, so a lot of tragedy in his life. His baby daughter died in St. Petersburg, Russia. They had to bury her there. The Amistad case, in which John Quincy Adams fought for freedom for these African slaves that had rebelled off the coast of Cuba and eventually made their way. They're trying to go back to Africa. Eventually, they ended up in jail in, I believe, Connecticut. And he won their freedom, and he became one of the great warriors against slavery. During the latter part of his life. Very inspiring. He died with his boots on at age 80 in the U.S. Capitol, the House of Representatives. He had a stroke at his desk. And back then, I don't think they had hospitals, and he was brought to this office of the Speaker. Died 2 days later, so he died at work. What an amazing guy. He was very interested in learning, very educated, very interesting guy. Kind of a funny guy, sometimes kind of difficult, kind of crazy, and spent a lot of time, and he had this interesting childhood because his father went over to Europe trying to get support from France during the American Revolution, and he brought his son with him. So really interesting life, very, very entertaining and inspiring. John Quincy Adams. And this Fred Kaplan, this is a tremendous biography. The next book is American Lion, Andrew Jackson in the White House by John Meacham, 2008. John Meacham is another one of these fellows, famous historian and biographer of American presidents, and this is about the very controversial Andrew Jackson, the Indian fighter, hero of the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812 against the British. He faced down the South Carolina secessionists, which was really a prelude to the Civil War. He fought the corrupt U.S. Bank, and in my opinion, Andrew Jackson was a great man, and his portrait should remain on the $20 bill. He's, for those on the political left, a decision was made in recent years that they believe Andrew Jackson is this terrible villain, and he's been condemned for his actions with respect to American Indians, and especially with what's called the Trail of Tears, when American Indians were moved from Georgia to Oklahoma, and a lot of them died. It was not planned well. They did not get good care, and I don't think they had enough food to eat or medical care or shelter, and he's blamed for that. But I feel compelled to defend him because, and the thing they blame him for in large part is the fact that he fought American Indians. In my opinion, without Indian fighters, our country could the history of the United States could not have happened. The United States is a creation of a European conquest of North America, European immigrants. And the Indians were fighters. They were warriors. They didn't just, of course, a lot of them died from disease that was introduced that they didn't have immunity from, that Europeans brought. But they fought. They didn't just allow the Europeans to take the land. And so if you want to condemn Andrew Jackson, then you want to condemn all Americans who were a part of that trend, all these European immigrants who left Europe because they were so poor and there was no opportunity and came to America for a better life. Do you want to condemn them? Do we want to condemn the existence of the United States? I don't think so. And the thing is, today we don't value courage anymore. And Andrew Jackson was a brave man. It is tragic. What happened to American Indians is extremely tragic, and we should be able to face that and talk about it and learn about it. Face what happened to them, this horrific tragedy. But don't blame Indian fighters. Andrew Jackson wasn't perfect. This is just my opinion. I believe he was a great man. And now that some people would condemn me, say, "Oh, you're supporting a villain. Therefore you are a villain." Well, I think I'm entitled to my opinion. So anyway, this is a fine book about Andrew Jackson, very controversial American president. The next book is Forgotten Sundays, a son's story of life, loss, and love from the sidelines of the NFL by Jerry Sandusky, 2014. This is an outstanding book. The author's father, John Sandusky, played for the Cleveland Browns in the National Football League in the 1950s and was head coach of the Baltimore Colts for part of 1 year and a long-time offensive line coach for the Colts, Philadelphia Eagles, and Miami Dolphins. This is a beautiful story of a man, his father growing up, the death of a brother, his father developing Alzheimer's disease, his mother dying young, and NFL football on Sunday afternoons. And then the other thing is that first Jerry Sandusky, another guy with the same name, was this college football coach who was accused and convicted of molesting kids. And this Jerry Sandusky, people were confused. He ended up, people thought it was him, and it wasn't. So he had to deal with a lot of grief based on having the same name of a guy who was turned out to be a bad guy. And but this book is about, this author and his love for his father. He was a kid. His dad was a coach for the Colts, and talks about Johnny Unitas, the famous Baltimore Colt, and actually Super Bowl III, which was the Baltimore Colts against the New York Jets and Joe Namath. And the author was a kid. He was like 10 or 12, and the Jets won. And this is kind of disappointing, but it's part of life. So he was growing up, having his dad being a coach for the and rooting for the Colts, and then his dad getting fired. It was hard. So it's about a lot of this is very touching. A lot of it's the love of a boy for his father and vice versa, and being NFL fans together. Mostly, early on of the Baltimore Colts, and then later when his dad got fired, the Eagles and Dolphins. Really enjoyed this book. The next book is Switzerland for Beginners by George Mikes, 1975. This is an outstanding book. I bought this book when I was in Gstaad, Switzerland. I worked over there as a teacher at the Gstaad International School between 1989 and 1991. And I bought this book. I think I gave it to my parents, as like a souvenir. And I don't know if they read it. I had never read it. I finally read it, many years later. Just read it a couple years ago, 3 years ago. And the author writes with amusement about that small country of mountains, snow skiing, chocolate, natural beauty, and simple people. Yeah, an interesting country. Switzerland's a real small country. They speak, 4 languages. In the West, French. Most of the country is German-speaking, and a small area of Italian-speaking in the South. And then there's this other, I think, an ancient language. I think it's the Romish language. So they're good people. It's in the Alps mountains, so it's a mountainous country, real pretty. So the Swiss people, they're a mountain people, and they were real poor. It's actually pretty poor before. It's become a rich country through international banking and tourism. This is why I was working at that school. It was Gstaad, Switzerland is this a ski resort town, and you have all these, actually some wealthy tourists, international tourists who come there to ski. And then you have the local dairy farmers, living their simple lives. So I enjoyed myself there. It was a real pretty country, and it's this very interesting country, Switzerland, in Europe. Between France, Italy, Austria, and Germany. The next book is Zachary Taylor by John S.D. Eisenhower, 2008. So this is a biography of the 12th U.S. president. He was elected in 1848, served for only 16 months, from March of 1849 till his death in July of 1850. Taylor was a hero in the Mexican War and a longtime Indian fighter in the West. God bless Zach Taylor, a man who served his country well. Brave, kind, patriotic, good man. He got sick, a year and 4 months into his presidency, so didn't serve that long as president, and then his vice president, Millard Fillmore, finished his term, and he became famous in the Mexican War, which brought in the entire Southwest, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and he was a good guy, and that war, that wasn't an easy war. We look back on it now and we think, it wasn't easy. And Taylor was a good guy. That was why he was effective as a leader. The men had good morale under him because he treated them well. He was a brave man. He had humility. He was not, despite wealth and power. He was a good guy. And this author, John Eisenhower, is the son of Dwight Eisenhower, the famous American general in the Second World War, and also U.S. president. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. I hope you find a good history book to read, or a nonfiction, or any book, but history or otherwise, because there's so many amazing books to read. So anyway, thanks again. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.